Have you ever seen a whistle do that? The crackling of the fire, a little bit of hissing, smoke coming out the top. I mean, you're basically witnessing the real thing. Welcome to Hardy Locomotive Works. We are going to do a will it run video, but it's going to be different than just some booster cables and ether. Because we're going to do it to a 100-year-old steam locomotive. Now, this is something that's totally legal to do on my own property, and we've also evaluated the condition of the boiler with an ultrasonic and a hydraulic test and verified that it can indeed handle a little bit of air pressure in order to do this test, but the boiler will need work in the future before it is certifiable and can be steamed up. Now, we're going to start at the top and work our way down. This is the dome on top of the boiler where the steam collects, and it is where the throttle valve is located. It's inside of here, and that is so that the throttle can be supplied with dry steam, and there's little chance of the still liquid water that would be in the boiler to get sucked up into that throttle valve and getting water in the cylinders that would wreck everything. So in order to get access to it, we need to unbolt the bolts and the studs that are holding this dome cover on, and we'll have a look inside. We even have a snipe if we need it. Came loose like a dream. I have spread some kerosene over the top of this thing a couple of times, hoping that that would penetrate and help loosen these nuts up. We might not even need the snipe. You know, this is really exciting. I have dreamed of working on steam locomotives my whole life, and this is my first time getting to pull a wrench on a steam locomotive in order to fix it. I'm just tickled. What a wonderful opportunity. I'm so thankful for it. Oh, well, it looks like we have our first catastrophe, which is this stud that's broken. The crack is rusted, so that means that it's been broke for quite a while. But I guess that's our first restoration project right there. So that's all the nuts off the studs removed. Now there's a few bolts in here, assumingly replacing studs that have broken over the years. Well, there we go. Oh, look at that. It's not even stuck on there. Man, I hope this is a good sign of what is to come. I guess the only hard part now is trying to lift this thing off. I don't know if I'm tough enough to do this. I'll try. Oh yeah. Huh. Looky here, looky here. So we got a little cobweb to greet us, and then this unit here is the gasket. I'm not sure what material this is. It kind of looks like it's copper. This big apparatus in the middle is the throttle valve. The two other steam lines there go to fittings in the cab. The main one is the big steam turret up there. Look at the condition of those fire tubes. Man, looks kind of too good to be true. You can also see the throttle valve mechanism in there. I'm going to pour a bunch of kerosene on that, see if we can get that freed up. So why the kerosene, Ethan? Well, it's because it's basically a cheap penetrant. And it really worked on these studs. You can see that they're almost wet all the way through, and that was from multiple coats of the kerosene. And aside from the linkage, if we need to take out any of these other bolts and nuts for the restoration, giving them a coat of kerosene right now and maybe one later is really going to help with disassembly. Now here's the other end of this throttle linkage, and this is the throttle valve itself that you stand and pull on in the cab. And we're going to take this apart so that we might be able to get some wrenches on the valve stem right here and see if we can loosen this linkage up. You can see right now if I put my hand on it, there's a little bit of movement, but that's actually because the handle is loose on the valve stem there. The valve stem isn't moving at all, so it is seized and we're gonna have to take it apart. Now we'll use one of my favorite adjustable wrenches. This is a Diamond Tool and Horseshoe Company wrench, just to trigger some people. And unlike what the mechanics seem to think, man, if you use these wrenches properly, in the bigger sizes, of course, not the little ones. Little ones are pretty much, oh, look at that. Look at that. Look at how useful a crescent wrench is. Didn't even have to try. It's just magical. In order to remove this packing gland that was very stuck, I've been backing off some nuts that are on the studs underneath of it, lifting it up. But I noticed that this stem here was coming with it, and so the stem is obviously seized in this gland. So in order to avoid lifting that and possibly bending anything further, we want to try and hit this back down and unseize that. If you're gonna have to hit on the end of a thread, of course, put the nut on the end of the thread, and I want to be extra careful, so I have a brass hammer that's not super heavy, so I'm just going to use it as an in between my steel hammer here. Okay, so unfortunately, we have a problem. As I have beaten on this, it's actually slightly bent the stem here. Oh, look at what you have done, Ethan. Just try and wiggle this. Oh my goodness. But as I'm wiggling it side to side, oh, it's come loose. That is super cool. Check that out. Looks like we got some flaky stuff here. I wonder what that is. It almost looks like there's some type of sealant on here or something. Some type of a silicone. So the next thing that we got to do is clean out the scale in the boiler. Let's take a look behind this fitting here in the corner. And there's these all around the corner of the firebox and the bottom of the boiler barrel. We have a bunch of scale here. And we need to take this out to inspect the bottom of the mud ring. That's what is at the bottom of the firebox here, and of course everywhere else on the boiler. This is probably from the water treatment that was in the water. This is a good sign because all the solids from the impurities in the water and rust from the boiler are consolidated, and it falls off of the boiler and it can be cleaned out instead of attaching itself to the walls of the boiler.
So what did they treat the water with?
Chemicals.
Yeah.
Basically, so modern water treatment theory is similar to what we think about engine oil. So old engine oils, non-detergent engine oils, the oil doesn't hold the worn out particles in suspension. So if you have an oil like in a machine, like in a motor, and you get like the bits of cylinder wall or whatever that wear off, they fall to the bottom of the oil pan and the oil stays clean-ish.
Right.
Right? Okay. And then with modern oils, the oil absorbs those particles and it holds them in suspension.
Okay.
So that the oil gets dirty, and then when you drain the oil out, there's no, or there shouldn't be any sludge at the bottom of the oil pan or anything. All of that crud is absorbed by the oil, held in suspension, like iced tea mix that's been mixed into the water.
Okay.
And then it drains out. Okay, and so a good water treatment is actually gonna make the water dirty, okay, so that the water absorbs and holds all the particles in suspension. And then when you drain the boiler and you blow the boiler down and stuff, it's gonna get rid of that because it's in the water, instead of having clean water and then having all the particle or all of the sediment and stuff either stick to the boiler or just settle at the bottom and then stay there.
Right. So if you do it properly, you don't have to send your manservant in there every time.
Yeah,
You
that's right. So it looks like we've found a piece of iron in there, and this is actually, what, the third or fourth? They look like this over here. They were round, but Evans had to squish them in order to get them out. I have a suspicion that these are cut ends of boiler tube from maybe sometime in its history when the tubes were replaced, and maybe these cut ends fell into the firebox. So that's just a decorative cover basically, and it holds on together this piece of tin, which has insulation in it, or
Okay.
originally did. It's just stuck. I'm not sure. Looking at it. See, I'm using a brass or a copper hammer here that I'm actually hammering on, basically using this like a punch with a handle so that I don't mar up the sides of this cover real bad. So this is interesting. The other side was dry when I took it off, had some dry rust. This has some sludge in it. I hope it's kerosene sludge and not water sludge, but we'll see. So again, the main reason that we took off these covers was to get off this piece of tin, because under it is some insulation and a bunch of gunk and stuff. So it looks like there was a small rivet or something that was holding the one side on. It was so rusted I didn't even see it. You can see it a little bit on this side. I figured that we'll just pry it off of there anyway. So who knows what this insulation stuff is? Look at that. Ooh, it is crusty. I'm sure it's asbestos-y stuff. Wow. And I'm glad that I have a wife that knows how to make sandwiches, because otherwise, if I was a bachelor, that's probably what I'd be eating for dinner. It might be hard to see. It's a little dusty in here, and I have the dust collection system on. And that is because Evan is working on vacuuming out the drain holes here at the bottom of the boiler. He's taken out most of the big chunks that you can see in this pail manually, and now we're going to use the vacuum a little bit. So here you're getting to see in the drain plugs a little bit, and you can see that there's that little bit that needs to be vacuumed out there, but that's pretty much what it looks like clean. So now we're going to work on removing the front. Go, here's the inside of the cylinder. Got 2 dead mouses, and the rest of it looks pretty good, but let's do a thorough inspection. We now have both the cylinder head covers off. Thankfully, they're both looking oily. There's a little bit of sludge in that one. It'll need cleaned out too. And you know, one thing that's interesting that I've noticed, on one of the cylinder head covers, we have a repair. You can see right here, it looks kind of gunky. Same with right here. It might even pass all the way through. And I think this is brazing. You can see a little bit of the bronze there in the corner. And that's not much of a downfall, because if it's been repaired and if it works, then we'll just leave it like that as long as it's accurate. Also notice we have two numbers here in the casting. I assume this is a part number here. And we also have this 13 by 18, and that's the cylinder dimensions. And that's nice because now we can indeed confirm the size of this locomotive because it has those 13 by 18 inch cylinders. We know we have 36-inch driving wheels, and that can give us the size of the locomotive or confirm that. We thought it was a 33-ton locomotive, and so that makes sense. That maps onto that. And here's all the cladding that came off of the cylinders. Thankfully, this one side here looks complete enough, even though it does have a big hole in it, that we can get the dimensions of it to cut a new one out for both, because that one's toast. So this mechanism that I've been working on is the valve gear, and this is the reverse lever that controls that valve gear. Now it's a Stephenson's link reverse valve gear, and the simplest way that I know how to explain that is that there's one eccentric that's timed to drive the engine forward and one eccentric that's timed to drive the engine in reverse. This lever controls how the valve gear is hooked up so that either the forward timed eccentric is driving the valve gear, and so that times the steam emitting and exhausting out of the cylinder so that it's driving the engine forward, and vice versa when you pull the lever back. So if you remember when we took off the dome cover, we broke a stud, or at least finished off one that was already broken. I tried to get it out of there with the pipe wrench, but it started to twist a little bit and it wasn't coming out. So we're going to resort to using a little bit of heat, a little bit of hammering. Let's see if we can get this little unit out of here. Well, I tried to tap it there to straighten it because it was a little bent, but we just busted it. And that's probably because I busted it with the pipe wrench. I probably twisted it too much. Let's see if we can select for ourselves one of these bolt getter outers. Now, unfortunately, I haven't had much success with these in the past, but I guess we're going to see how we get on here. Well, unfortunately, I think we have failed. The extractor is just turning in there, just marring it up in there. The thread is probably rust welded itself right in there. So I'm gonna ask some friends what to do about this. Instead of just drilling it out and tapping it, it's probably gonna be drilled out to a slightly bigger size and tapped, but we'll see about that. So I guess we're gonna take a fail on this for now. Okay, well, it's a fresh day here, and I have a new microphone hooked up to my camera. Hopefully that'll be more enjoyable for you folks. Unfortunately, we have had no success in getting this dome stud out, so I'm going to try some more heat. So now we're going to try and let that cool for a little bit, and then we'll probably do another cycle of that. Oh my goodness, it moved. That's crazy. It's moving. That's unreal. I did not think that that was going to happen. Oh, and look at that. I dropped it. Wow. There it is. It even came out without getting through any of the threads, and so the threads should be all good in there. That is just awesome. Now, upon actually succeeding in this, let me tell you how I think that this works. When you heat up the stud, it expands. And you might think, well, there's going to be heat in this piece too, but actually the heat transfer between here and here, because they are not welded together, is more minimal than you'd think. So the stud in this case heats up, and not really the material around it. It expands, but it can't really expand because it's held in place by this. But it's getting hot, so it's getting soft, and so what ends up happening is, relatively speaking, it squishes as it tries to expand. Then, when it cools down, it contracts and gets smaller than it was to begin with, and that's what loosens it away from the threads in here. Then I sprayed it with kerosene, and you can see that actually penetrated down into the threads. The threads are in good shape, which is a good sign. This is great. I am very happy. So this is the copper gasket that seals the dome cover to the dome. There's also copper gaskets that seal the valve covers. I've went ahead on the polishing wheel and just taken off any high spots, and what we're going to do is anneal it. Now, unlike annealing steel, where you have to worry about the cooling rate of the steel and cool it down very slowly, it doesn't actually matter with copper. You can cool it down slowly, or you can cool it down in water very quickly. The main part of the annealing is just the heating up and the releasing of the tension in the copper, and that's what makes it soft. So we're going to do that with the torch quick. So we're up on the wagon top of the steam locomotive. That's the top of the firebox, and I want to put a pressure gauge on it so that we can see how much pressure we'll have in the boiler when we pressure it up. This gauge is an antique British steam gauge, but it has been certified, so it will give us a relatively accurate reading as to how much air we have in here. Oop, wrong way. So this little setup here wouldn't be acceptable if we were running this engine on steam, not only because of the fact that it doesn't have a siphon, but the vibrating and moving around would not do well with these little pipes here. But this will be good enough just to show us the pressure while we air it up. So here's the fittings that we're gonna need to hook this boiler up to air. I'm just gonna screw it right into the dome. This is probably the orifice where the whistle was originally connected. That's what I've seen in some original photos, but we're gonna send air into it this way. Just so you know, we gotta be gentle with it when we set it down, because I don't wanna set it down wrong and mar or mark or damage the gasket.
Right.
And it'll kind of squish our fingers when we set it down. So there's like a bit of a gap. So this smokestack is not the original smokestack, and it's not how we want it to look when it's finished, because we'll need a much taller smokestack. However, the engine would look funny without one if we tried to move it. So let's try and get some bolts in there, because it's just sitting on there at the moment and I don't want it to fall off and break. As you can see, the smoke box is rotted out on top pretty good, so this whole thing will need to be replaced, this outer smoke box shell. Now we don't want to bang our heads in here. Let me bring you along. It's a little dark in here, but here's the inside of the smoke box. There's the smokestack. This here is the end of the dry pipe, which is after the throttle valve where the dry steam, that's why it's called the dry pipe, instead of wet water, comes. It goes into this T and goes down into the one cylinder and the other cylinder respectively. Well, what would a steam locomotive be without a whistle? Looks like we're all set. Hey, do you know how these fittings work?
No, I've actually never seen them before. So that's it just sitting on there.
Okay, yes, it's got to go over the nut. Perfect.
Just like that?
Yep. So this is loose, and then there's rubber seals in there, and when it gets pressure under it, it pushes against each other, and that's what seals it. So I wanted to butt in here quick and tell you there's been more that we've done to this locomotive than what you've seen in the video to ensure a little bit of safety as we air this thing up. Now usually I like to leave things like that out of the video so that it gives people something to rage about in the comments. But in this case, because of the nature of what we're doing, I thought it best to just tell you, I'm not going to tell you exactly what we did, but we've done a few things to ensure that this thing isn't going to bust apart when we put a little bit of air in it. Well, here's where the magic happens behind the shop. This is a 185 CFM Ingersoll Rand compressor and a 500-gallon air storage tank. So this unit supplies air to the steam hammer, but today it's going to be providing air for the steam locomotive. While we're out here, I can show you a few more parts for the steam locomotive. Here's the saddle tank. This unit goes right on top of the boiler. There's a little bit of rust repair that's needed down there. You can see that hole is through, and there's a few little rust holes on the other side. But this water tank, boy, I mean, this area here is like ½ an inch thick. These are the air tanks that store air from the steam-powered air compressor, and that is for the air brakes on the locomotive. And this here is the original cab, which is in fair condition. It's a little tough, but all the original riveting is still on it, holding it together. So usually, if you had a steam boiler hooked up to a steam hammer, the boiler would be powering the steam hammer. In this case, the steam hammer, through a 3/4 inch air line, is powering the boiler. Now the first order of business is to try and blow out a mouse nest that was under this drain plug here. Well, boy, that worked pretty good, didn't it? I'll put the plug in there and we'll move on to cleaning some valves. So I'm going to put a little bit of pressure in the boiler, maybe 50 pounds or so, and start blowing down these valves behind me. This might get pretty dusty, I better open the door. Okay, I'm gonna crack open the throttle valve and see what kind of schmoo we can blow out of it. Well, I am really glad that that did not go into our cylinders. That used up all 50 psi right there, so I'm going to air up the boiler and we'll do that again until it's clean. Well, we just blew out the cylinders again and oh my goodness. Look at that. That shot out of here. All over the wall, it schmooed. On this side, it wasn't quite as bad, but it did hit the roof. There we go. We've got the valve covers back on top and bolted down, and now what we're going to do is blow some air out the front of both cylinders just to make sure we've got everything else out. There's our pressure gauge there, just about at 50 pounds. Here's our view from the driver's seat.
And the manservant.
And the manservant. Doesn't he look pretty? He'll be the hood ornament.
Yes.
Ready? Yep. So we've decided that we're going to put the front cylinder cover back on, and we're just preparing and cleaning those areas that need to meet, and we've smeared oil all around the inside of the cylinder and on the piston and made sure it's clean, free of debris. Let's throw it up on there. So what we've done is we've wrapped chains around the rail here. We're going to put another one at the front just as a safety so that the locomotive can't run off the rails. And then we'll move these ones back. We'll put another tie under the back rails here. And then we'll be able to run it back and forth a few feet. That's a chuck. Well, it's the next day now, and we're gonna build a little bit more railroad track, because while it's impressive to run the locomotive just here in the shop, I think if we build about 60 feet of rail outside of the shop and run it back and forth a bit, that'll be a little bit more fun. There's a couple things that we fixed this morning that we noticed were problems last night. One of them was that the dome cover was leaking around that gasket. We figured we actually put the dome cover on the wrong way from how we got it anyways, whether or not that was the original orientation. In any case, we've spun that around, retightened that, we'll see how that holds up. There's also a few mechanical things we're going to keep an eye on, such as the split bearing here on the connecting rod. It was sloppy just a little bit back and forth, so that's probably going to be an area that we'll have to address in the restoration. So we'll start the loader up and we'll start laying some track down. Well, that little tractor done wore me out. I wanted to use it to pull the track in closer because it's a nice small tractor. It'll fit in between the tracks. And I don't feel like pull starting the tractor. And then I remembered I have a steam locomotive. Well, there it is, folks. A 100-year-old Vulcan steam locomotive that has run under its own power. It's 100 years old. First time it's run under its own power in 50 years. And wow, that was quite an experience. So aside from just getting to play with this thing, the practical purpose of doing this was to assess the running gear and see some of the things that we might need to address in the restoration. Now, we are planning on restoring this thing to operational condition with steam, pulling a train with it, all that stuff. But let me show you first some of the things that we found that we might need to address. A couple of the obvious things that we found was that this bearing here is a little sloppy, so the connecting rod kind of slams a little bit back and forth. I mean, it's very small, but it clicks. That's not good. Also, both of the expansion links on the valve gear, that's the banana-shaped slot there. Both of them are a little bit loose, wobbly, side to side a bit. So So they're going to need to be taken apart, remachined, bushed, so that they're nice and tight. And then the valve gear may need to be adjusted. But one thing that I noticed while we were running it is that the beats, the chuffing of the smokestack is actually really even. If they were really even, like chuff, 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 that shows that you have valves that, among other things, aren't set right. And the steam locomotive is more efficient and easier to get a train going when you have well set valves with even beats, even volume and even distance between the beats of the smokestack. We're also going to have to take the covers back off the cylinder, the valve chest, the top of the dome. Throttle valve needs reground. It leaks, not quite like a sieve, but pretty close. Here's another thing that needs addressed, but I've known this since I bought the engine, and that's that the whole thing leans a little bit, and those springs lean over, and the back one there actually, depending on where the locomotive is, you can see it's rubbed a little bit on that spring hanger at some point in its life, which is not very good. Well, I left the locomotive outside overnight hoping to strip the paint, but it's springtime in Alberta. Here we have a blizzard and 6 inches of snow. In any case, today's March 28th. It's the 100-year birthday of this locomotive. We're going to celebrate by having a Coke in conjunction with this lovely whistle bottle opener that I made this morning. I'm going to be offering these for sale on my website to commemorate the 100-year birthday of this machine. Cheers, old man. Well, that's all, folks. Hope you had fun watching us get this locomotive running, and we'll catch you on the next video. Camera with both sides of your eye, man. I'm having trouble focusing with that eye. That seems abnormal. It seems very blurry. Wow. I might need a prescription. That's crazy. Look at that. When I look at it with this eye, I can't focus. I can barely read the sticker on the back of my phone. Man, my right eye is much clearer. What a strange thing. Okay,